Hey, what's up? PizzaLovingNerd here. I've always been a huge fan of Pine 64 products. Just look at how many videos I've made on the Pine phone. So, when they offered to send me a Pinebook Pro, I happily accepted it. So, I've had this bad boy for about 2 weeks now, and this is my review so far. Full disclosure, Pine 64 did send this to me. They sent me a open box unit that somebody returned with a little bit of cosmetic shipping damage. However, this unit is fully functional. And keep in mind, I've also done some stuff for them, such as videos on their channel. So, just full disclosure when you're watching this review. However, they don't get to see this video before you do, and I can say whatever I want about the product. Now let's start with the build quality. Keep in mind this is $220. The build quality on here is pretty dang good. The entire chassis of the laptop is made of metal, I believe aluminum, but don't quote me on that. The screen on here is better than any other $200 laptop you're going to be getting. The viewing angles are good, color accuracy is good. Really the only downside to the screen is that it's only 1080p, which for me is just enough. Like, the monitor for my desktop computer that is like twice as big is also only 1080p, and it looks fine to me. It's very thin, about as thin as a MacBook Air, only a little bit thicker than a MacBook Air. Its keyboard is pretty good. I wouldn't say it's anything to write home about, but it's actually usable. Originally, in my original draft of this review, I just said it was mediocre. However, now that I've used it for like school and stuff, I wrote actually an essay on this thing for school. This keyboard has actually grown on me a little bit. The trackpad is about average. When I opened the box, the trackpad was actually terrible. However, thanks to a software update, the trackpad is much better now and can easily compete with pretty much any Windows laptop now, although a Mac is still going to have way better trackpad support. The only thing I complain about build quality wise is the speakers on this thing are pretty bad. They're usable, but I wouldn't really recommend it if you're trying to watch like a show or listen to music. If you're doing that, get headphones. However, if you're trying to watch a tutorial or something, these are perfectly fine. Or if you're watching a YouTuber like me doing a review, these are fine. Just like if you want to watch a movie, I'd use headphones. In terms of I/O, we have, I believe this is called a barrel port for power, as well as a USB 3.0 port right here, and a USB-C port. Now, one nice thing about this USB-C port is that it does do power transfer, which means I don't actually have to bring the extra charger for the Pinebook Pro. I could just bring my phone charger, and if the battery happens to die, plug it into my phone charger. Easy. Speaking of the battery life on this thing is great. I unplugged this laptop at about 7 in the morning when I was leaving for school, and it is now 10:25 when I'm recording this, and it's still at 19%. Very good battery life. This won't beat like an M1 MacBook. However, this will definitely beat pretty much any Windows 10 laptop you will get, unless you shell out like $1,000 or more. Now let's talk about performance on this thing, but first I'm going to go through a quick overview of the specs because the specs are going to help me explain how the performance works on this thing. I'll just go through the basic specs. You can easily look up the specs if you want to know them, so I'm not going to go full blast, full detail on the specs. In terms of RAM, there are 4 gigs of LP DDR4 DRAM in here, and then it uses an RK3399 as the SoC. Now, this SoC for the CPU is actually hexa-core, so it has 6 cores in it. However, these cores will not be as good as something like in a Celeron. So, in terms of like single core performance, this thing is not going to be very good at all. But when you get to multitasking, this works a little bit better. Still nothing to write home about though, because keep in mind this isn't meant to be daily driven. It can be daily driven. I'm using it as a school laptop right now, but it's not really meant to. It's more supposed to be a development device for the RK3399. XFCE and KDE Plasma on here are very smooth. However, GNOME runs a little bit slower. Now I'm using GNOME anyway just because it's my favorite desktop in general. And as you can see, like if I just go to this hot corner, it's actually running way better now than my first take of this video. Sometimes there's a little bit of stuttering on GNOME. However, if you turn off animations, it runs great. In terms of word processing, I've not only written an essay on this already, and it worked fine, but I've also done some coding on here, Now, it doesn't really support any big IDEs I want, like I can't get PyCharm working or IntelliJ, and I've also tried VS Code and that doesn't work. I'm sure if I did some compiling or something I could get it work, but I'm just lazy. However, KDE's text editor, that to be honest is basically a full IDE under the name of a text editor, Kate runs great. In terms of web browsing, both Firefox and Chromium do work here. I've noticed that Firefox seems to be faster for general web browsing, and I can actually have quite a few Firefox tabs open on this thing. However, if you're dealing with like web apps, Chromium seems to be better. So usually for general browsing, I use Firefox, and then I use Chromium for things like Microsoft Word Online and YouTube. YouTube, you actually get way better performance running videos through this thing compared to Firefox if you are using Chromium. So I'm kind of using a mix of both Chromium and Firefox on this system. Now this could be different because I'm running my favorite distro, Fedora, on here. Maybe this is different than Manjaro, which is what it ships with. However, both Firefox and Chromium seem to run fine on this, with Chromium being a tiny bit slower, except for web app stuff. Another thing performance-wise is this doesn't get hot at all. The entire bottom of the laptop acts as a heatsink, which helps cool the CPU significantly. And the bottom of this thing barely gets warm at all. So good job on heating, Pine. In terms of software, if you intend to daily drive this, I recommend checking to see if what you want to use will already run on this thing. There's builds of Arch, ARM, Manjaro, there's Ubuntu ported over with Armbian. There's an unofficial port of Fedora Linux, which is what I'm using, and it seems to run very well. Postmarket OS works on here. What else? There's quite a few options. However, I will say, make sure to use a Linux distro that uses Manjaro's kernel. That doesn't mean you have to be on Manjaro necessarily. Actually, the Fedora port that I'm using uses Manjaro's kernel, and Arch ARM also uses Manjaro's kernel. This kernel has much better integration with the hardware than just the pure mainline one, so I would highly recommend using Manjaro's Pinebook Pro kernel if you are using this laptop. Of course, you can install a distro that doesn't have it and then install the kernel on top of that. That's the nice thing about Linux, it's modular, you can customize it with stuff like that. However, software with the Manjaro kernel seems to run better on this thing, for me. So, should you get this laptop? If you're looking for something to daily drive, I would actually recommend getting a 2-year-old more expensive laptop secondhand on eBay for $200. Pay $200 and then you get a laptop that was $500 2 years ago. That way you aren't stuck with a Celeron or an RK3399 to daily drive. However, if you do want a brand new laptop and you don't want to buy secondhand, which I understand you don't really know what you're getting into when you buy something on, say, eBay. In terms of buying a new laptop, this is a very good option if you know what you're doing when it comes to technology. If you're like some mom or something who wants to take it into Starbucks and check their email there, I would not recommend this laptop. However, if you know how to work around Linux, if you know how to check to see if software will run on ARM, which as a general rule of thumb, if it runs on a Raspberry Pi, it should run on this thing. If you know how to do stuff like that, very good option right here. It's going to have some tinkering, but if you're a Linux enthusiast like me, you're probably going to be already doing that tinkering on another computer. So if you're just even intermediate with computers and you know how to use the internet to look up if whatever you want to run will run on this thing, this can be a good option, although Pine64 themselves doesn't recommend you to daily drive it, so take that for what you will. Anyways, that's the video. Thank you for watching. I'm going to be pumping out quite a few more videos here. I'm going to be using my green screen less, which will make it easier for me to edit. And I'm going to be making just more broad videos instead of just Pine64 products, basically. That's basically my channel right now. And my goal is to make 2 videos a week, although don't hold me up to that. So that's the video. Thanks to my patrons, Mitchell Vantino, Sam Covett, Frank, Jim Peter, and Mario Scriptsguard, and I'll see you in the next one.